Freddy's back! The Nightmares on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger's 7 Sweetest Dreams. Not Just a Job by Nancy A. Collins. Billy, time to wake up, dear. Billy Cairo tossed aside his bedclothes, smiling at the morning sun peeping through the bedroom window. He sat up and stretched, exposing his smooth, flat tummy. The smell of bacon and eggs frying wafted up the stairs from the kitchen, making his mouth water. He hurriedly pulled on his jeans and t-shirt, making sure to stuff his slingshot in the back pocket of his pants and snatch up his catcher's mitt before rushing downstairs. Standing at the kitchen counter, an apron cinched around her hourglass waist to protect the pleated calf-length dress she wore, Billy's mom looked just like the mothers Billy saw on television. Nora Cairo smiled when she saw her son. "Good morning, sweetheart. Ready for some breakfast?" "Sure thing, Mom." Billy plopped down opposite his father, resting his catcher's mitt on the corner of the table. "Morning, Billy boy. Sleep well?" Earl Cairo put aside his morning paper to smile lovingly at his only child. His broad, even features were TV star handsome. He could almost pass for Ward Cleaver or Ozzie Nelson. He held a smoking pipe in one hand, for God's sake. "You bet, Dad." Billy's mother placed a Fiesta-ware plate full of bacon, scrambled eggs, and biscuits in front of him. "Eat up, dear. You know how growing boys need their strength." As Billy ate his breakfast, he glanced at his father's wise, compassionate face and was overwhelmed by the love he felt for the man. For a moment, he thought he was going to cry. "Dad?" "Yes, son?" "Will you play catch with me after breakfast?" Earl Cairo chuckled and sucked on his pipe. "I don't see why not." "Oh, boy!" He pushed his plate aside and hopped off the chair, making sure to grab his catcher's mitt. "Come on, Dad, let's go." "Not so fast, young man," Nora Cairo said, mock sternly. "You forgot to drink your orange juice." "Ah, Mom!" "Don't you aw-mom me, William Cairo. You're not going outside till you've finished that juice." She pointed to the glass sitting where he'd left it on the table. Billy, his lower lip pushed out in a pout, reached for the orange juice and noticed for the first time that it was an funny sepia brown. Now that he thought about it, everything was kind of colorless. Mom, Dad, the kitchen, just like the old syndicated sitcoms from the 50s he saw on cable. And come to think of it, wasn't he actually 22 years old? And he was pretty sure his name wasn't Billy Cairo anymore. "Didn't you hear your mother? Drink your juice, son." Billy stared at his father's grinning face. He still felt immense love for the man, but there was something else mixed with it as well. Earl Cairo leaned forward, clenching the smoking pipe between his even white teeth. For a moment, Billy was afraid his father was going to bite him. "What's the matter, Billy?" Earl Cairo's smile grew wider, showing more and more teeth as his voice changed. You're dead, Dad." "Now that you mention it, so I am." Mr. Cairo laughed and his face fell away, revealing the grinning skull beneath. After showering and putting on his clothes, Billy thumped downstairs to the kitchen. His mother, her hair in curlers and a cigarette clamped between her lips, was rinsing a skillet in the sink. His stepfather was still seated at the table, hidden behind the sports page. Billy's place at the breakfast table was marked by the folded classified section. "About time you got up." Nora Hepler removed a plate of bacon and eggs from the warmer and put it in front of her son. Billy grunted and had watched his mother as she poured his glass of milk. She eyed his jeans, sneakers, and Metallica t-shirt with undisguised contempt. "Are you going to go job hunting dressed like that?" Ray Hepler lowered his newspaper and frowned at his stepson. Christ, he hadn't even had a chance to drink his milk, and they were already doing a fucking tag team number on him. "What's wrong with how I'm dressed?" "Nothing, if all you want to be is a janitor." What's wrong with me being a janitor? You fucked my dad, and he wasn't nothing but a goddamn grease monkey. The words boiled up behind his larynx, warning to leap from his tongue. You want me to be a brown-nosed executive like your dickless second husband here, don't you? You want me to be just like Ray, so I'll have lots of money and a nice house and credit cards and a brain the size of a walnut. Is that it, bitch? Even as he thought these things, he felt ashamed. His mother loved him. She could have easily left him after his father's sudden death to the apathetic care of the state's foster home system. But instead, she'd married a man she didn't really love because she thought he would make a good provider for her son. Okay, I'll put on a good shirt before I leave, okay, Mom? Nora Hepler smiled, pleased with having won her small victory. And a tie. Billy rolled his eyes and groaned. Mom, you know I only want what's right for you. Gracious, look at the time. I better skedaddle. If I don't want to be late to the office, you know. Ray put aside his newspaper and picked up his briefcase. Billy looked away as his mother pecked his stepfather's cheek. Jesus, what a wimp. Ray was, in Billy's opinion, a serious drip, always seeing shit like skedaddle and groovy. The guy wore socks with clocks on them. For crying out loud, socks with clocks on them. And Mom chewed him out for wearing a Metallica shirt. Really? His parents were constantly riding his ass about being a lazy good-for-nothing. Actually, his mom did most of the bitching. His stepfather didn't approve of him, but if he had any opinions on the subject, he kept them to himself. Ray Hepler didn't have to waste his breath, since his wife did enough complaining for two people. Not that it did any good. The more she nagged, the more Billy resisted her suggestions. If his mother said white, Billy said black. Billy saw no need in accommodating his mother's expectations, although he loved her in the same dim way he felt affection for his old moth-eaten teddy bear, Squeezer. Billy took the classified section back upstairs while his mother cleared the breakfast plates. He tossed the paper onto his unmade bed and changed into a dress shirt, and the tie his mother had bought for his high school graduation 4 years ago. As he stood in front of the full-length mirror, fronting his closet door, sweating over a Windsor knot, he caught a flicker of movement behind him, reflected in the glass. Frowning, he turned to stare at the newspaper resting on his bed. That's funny. I could have sworn it was folded. The paper lay open at the help wanted section. Billy's gaze drifted over the cramped columns of tiny print. Employers advertising for jobs either too specialized or too shitty for a 22-year-old with a degree in general studies from good old Springwood Community College. But then he noticed an ad that was larger and oblong with a heavy black border. It read, "Position open. Looking for a motivated self-starter interested in getting ahead? Tired of taking orders? Want to be your own boss? Well-defined career advancement opportunities based on performances and skills attainment await for the right candidate. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to get in on the ground floor. Set your own hours. Learn on the job. Comprehensive retirement plan. This is your big chance at landing that dream job. Contact Mr. Krueger at 555-4673 for an appointment today." Billy studied the ad carefully, trying to find a street address. "Funny, I didn't see this the first time," he muttered, refolding the newspaper. He headed back downstairs. His mother looked up from her soap opera digest. A filtered cigarette smoldered in the saucer at her elbow. "Well, at least you're dressed properly this time." "Can I have the car?" "You know today's my afternoon for bridge over at Ellen's. You can take the bus. It won't kill you." Billy jerked the refrigerator door open and poured himself a glass of orange juice. He had the glass halfway to his lips when he remembered his dream. He felt dizzy and set the tumbler back on the counter with a loud thump. "Something wrong, honey?" Billy stared at the yellowish liquid and felt his forebrain throb. I'm all right. It's just something made me think of this dream I had." Her frown deepened. "You haven't been having dreams about your father again, have you?" Billy wished his mother would come and put her arms around him like she used to do, but she remained seated, her face set in a harsh mask. She looked like she'd just taken a bite out of a lemon. He didn't like the way she stared at him, as if searching his face for some telltale flaw. "I don't mind dreaming about Dad, it's just the nightmares I don't like." She turned her face away from his. "That's all dead and gone. It's better that you forget. Ray's your father now, honey." In a pig's eye, he thought. "What's that, dear?" "I better fly if I don't want to be late," he said, doing his best imitation of his stepfather. When he left, she was still seated at the kitchen table, studiously poring over the traumas and heartbreaks of fictional strangers. "Hey, Billy, wait up!" Billy turned to watch Marcy Sims hurry after him. "Hey, Marcy." "Hi, Billy. I haven't seen you for a while." "Yeah, well, you know how it goes." Billy shrugged and started walking again. Marcy fell in step beside him. "Are you working?" "No, I'm going job hunting today at my mom's command." "I've got a job working part-time at the public library." "Is that so?" Billy tried to hide the boredom in his voice, but not very hard. He'd met Marcy at the community college. They'd shared a couple of classes, and their after-lecture chats had evolved into dates. He even fucked her once, but Billy's interest in Marcy had waned soon after that. He'd been trying to avoid her since graduation. She wasn't particularly bad-looking, although she favored dumpy clothes and wore cat's eyes harlequin glasses. The thought that he'd actually porked such a loser made his stomach knot up. Still, Marcy was the closest thing to a friend that he had here in Springwood. "If you really need a job, I could, put in a good word for you with Mrs. McKenzie." Thanks, Marcy. I'll keep that in mind." "If you think I'm going to work in that dumbass library with you mooning over me like a lovesick cow, you're as goofy as you look," he thought to himself. Marcy seemed to take his feigned interest at face value and smiled. "You think you might, want to go out to a movie or something?" Billy stopped and turned to glare at her. "Marcy." "Yeah?" She squinted up at him from behind her harlequin glasses. She reminded him of a puppy, uncertain whether it would be rewarded with a pat or punished with a kick. Never mind." He glanced at his watch. "Look, I gotta hurry if I'm going to catch the bus downtown and make these interviews. Catch you later." He trotted toward the stop on the corner just as the bus pulled to the curb. "Please have a seat. The personnel director will be with you shortly." The receptionist pointed to an arrangement of uncomfortable-looking chairs and a glass coffee table with magazines stacked next to a kidney-shaped plastic ashtray, the color of urine. There were a couple of other applicants already there, each dressed in a suit identical to Billy's. He picked up one of the magazines. The cover said Home Office Monthly and promised to be chloroform in print. He stifled a yawn and blinked his eyes rapidly. The last thing he needed to do was doze off. "Mr. Cairo? Mr. William Henry Cairo?" Billy jerked at the sound of the receptionist's voice calling his name. He was still gripping the copy of Home Office Monthly in his hands, but everything else about the waiting room had changed. The other chairs were empty. The glass coffee table was smeared with a thick layer of dust. The non-threatening abstract pastel print on the wall opposite him hung askew. Cobwebs were dangling from the frame like rotten lace. Billy jerked his eyes toward the receptionist, poised behind her electric typewriter. Mounds of yellowed paper, liberally dusted with a decade's accumulation of grime, were heaped atop the previously tidy desk. The file cabinet's drawers yawned open, drifting of rotting papers spilling onto the floor. Billy struggled to his feet and walked across the damp, sticky carpet to where the receptionist sat, typing furiously. He thought he could hear flies, lots of them, buzzing in the distance. I'm William Cairo." The receptionist looked up and smiled at him. Her skin was a necrotic bluish gray, and there were spiders crawling in her hair. "Mr. Krueger will see you now." She gestured to a door with a frosted glass pane. A sign was lettered on the window in red paint. F. Krueger, Recruiting Department. The paint must have been very fresh because it was still running. It looked a lot like blood. Billy turned to ask the receptionist what it was this Krueger recruited, but she was gone.
"Come in, Billy! Come on, I've been waiting for you."
The door opened inward without his having to touch it. Billy stepped over the threshold and stared at the man behind the desk. He wore a ratty red and green striped sweater, a pair of grimy pants, and a dirty brown felt hat. He was also horribly burned. Billy guessed the business believed in hiring the handicapped. The burned man sat with his feet propped on his desk and his arms folded behind his head.
"Have a seat, Billy. We have a lot to discuss."
Billy sat in a chair leaking foam rubber from its seams. He folded his hands in his lap and tried to look at the strange man behind the desk without staring at his scars. It wasn't easy.
"My name's Krueger, Fred Krueger, but you can call me Freddy."
He brought his feet off the desk and shifted in his swivel chair.
"Let's see. Your name's Billy, am I right?"
He picked up a tattered, badly stained folder from the morass of paperwork heaped in front of him. At first, Billy thought Krueger had really long fingernails, but then he realized they were razors.
"Billy Cairo, is that it?"
Billy nodded. "Yes, sir." He frowned. "No, wait a minute. My name's Hepler. Billy Hepler."
"Wasn't your father Earl Henry Cairo?"
"Yes, sir, but my mother remarried a couple of years after he died, and her second husband adopted me. Changed my name to Hepler, you see." Krueger nodded as if this explained something, produced a pencil stub from behind his ruined ear, and scribbled a note in the folder.
Good, good. For a moment I thought I'd made a mistake."
"Sir?" Krueger grinned and stood up, walking around the desk in order to perch on the corner nearest Billy. Billy stared at the razor-thin slivers of stainless steel fitted into the worn leather gloves. There were a few splotches of reddish-brown on the razors.
"Billy, I used to be good friends with your father."
Billy blinked and stared into Krueger's warped, raw-meat face. In the 16 years since his untimely death, little had been said about Earl Cairo in his son's presence. His mother seldom mentioned her first husband. The only member of this family who ever spoke about his father, and always negatively, was his Aunt Lucille, his mother's older sister. Billy was only 7 years old when his father died, and his memories were those of early childhood, growing dimmer with every passing year. The idea that this disfigured stranger might possibly be able to tell him something about the father he barely knew made him giddy. "Really? You knew my dad?"
"Yeah, me and Earl went way back. We grew up in the same orphanage." "What's the matter? Didn't know your old man was an orphan?"
Billy shook his head, trying not to look too surprised. No, I never knew. I don't even remember what he looked like, really. Mom, my mother, didn't keep any pictures of him."
"Actually, Earl wasn't a complete orphan. He was 4 years old when his old lady left him with the nuns. She was a hooker, and having a kid around queered it with the Johns."
Billy felt his stomach tighten. A whore? His grandmother was a whore? His father a bastard? The scars twisting Krueger's face made it hard to tell if his smile was cruel or conciliatory.
"Hey, don't take it too hard, kid. It happens even in the best of families. Your dad and me became friends. We knew what it was like to have mothers who didn't want us around. That's why I'm offering you a job, because of your old man.
A job? What kind of job?
Let's just say it's a fast-growing franchise. I can tell you've got a lot of your father in you. More than you realize. Since he's not around to get you started in business, I thought it was only right. What, with me being practically your uncle, that I should step into the gap. You see, son, your dad and I were in the same line of work.
My father? He was a mechanic, though. Krueger shook his head, amused by Billy's ignorance.
That was his job. I'm talking about his profession.
I don't understand.
Don't worry. We have an excellent on-the-job training program. And if you play your cards right, you'll find the retirement package worth all the hassles. Remember, Billy, it's not just a job. It's a uniquely American folk tradition.
Billy jerked away. When the receptionist shook his shoulder, that is, she no longer had spiders in her hair and frowned at him disapprovingly. Mr. Caldone will see you now. Huh? What? Billy ran a hand through his hair, staring at his surroundings. Everything was neat and tidy again, the surfaces clean of dust. I'm sorry, I must have dozed off for a minute. Indeed, she sniffed before returning to her desk. The job interview didn't go well. Not that it mattered if he got the stupid job or not. He was only going through the motions to satisfy his mother and keep her off his back. Still, as he rode the bus back into the suburbs, Billy could not help but mull over the things the burned man had said about his father. And another thing, who was this Krueger? The rational side of his brain wanted to believe that the dream figure was an arbitrarily generated fiction that his unconscious mind had named after the guy who'd placed the weird ad in the paper. Remembering the help wanted notice he'd seen earlier, Billy unfolded the classifieds again. No matter how hard he looked, he could not find the black-bordered box. It was as if it had never existed. Nora Hepler lay stretched out on the couch, a bourbon and Coke in one hand, watching the afternoon soaps. Mom, I'm home. How'd the job hunt go? She didn't take her eyes from the images flickering across the 20-inch cathode tube. Billy grunted and shrugged. Hard to tell. I guess I'll find out in a day or two, Ma. I fixed you some tuna salad for lunch. It's in the fridge. Billy hesitated at the door to the living room, looking from his mother to the TV and back again. Mom? Yeah? Was my father... Was he an orphan? Nora Hepler propped herself on one elbow, fixing her son with a hard gaze. Why did you ask me that? It's just, Come on, asshole, come up with some logical reason besides some deformed weirdo you saw in a dream told you about it. Come on, think. It's just that, what with all this time, I just thought it was weird I've never heard from or seen anyone from his side of the family. Nora sighed. Well, you guessed right. Your father was an orphan. All I know was that he was raised in a Catholic orphanage and that he ran away whenever he was 17. That's all I know, honey. He didn't like talking about it. Oh. Billy, do you remember anything about your father? Billy shrugged, suddenly embarrassed by the bluntness of his mother's inquiry. Not much, really. I remember him teaching me how to play catch and letting me ride in the tow truck. But that's about it. Nora nodded, her eyes clouded by memory. That's all you need to remember, son. Go on and eat your lunch before the tuna salad dries out. Billy lay on his bed, headphones insulating him from the rest of the Hepler household. He stared at the Linnea Quigley and Frazetta posters papering the bedroom walls without really seeing them.
You've got a lot of your father in you, more than you realize.
Did he? Was there anything left of Earl Henry Cairo in him? There was no way of telling if his features reflected those of his father, since his mother had destroyed all the photos ever taken of her first husband. All Billy had to go on were a handful of threadbare facts. His father had been a mechanic. He'd been an orphan. He was born in 42 and died in 75 in a freak accident while driving his tow truck. Earl Cairo had been 33 at the time of his death, his wife 22, and his son 7. Do you remember anything about your father? Billy did remember his father. He at least remembered enough to love and miss him. He could recall playing catch with his father on the front lawn, but the only other memory he had of his father, of riding in the tow truck, the one that was far less distinct. He'd read in one of his textbooks that once something is experienced, it can never be truly forgotten. The conscious mind might misplace it, even cover it up, should it prove too painful to deal with, but it could never lose it. If that was true, all he had to do was free associate until his thoughts tripped the appropriate trigger, freeing that particular memory. Billy, wake up, boy! Come on! Billy opened his eyes and found himself staring into a strangely familiar face. With the leap of his heart, he realized he was looking at the face of his father. Earl Cairo didn't look a thing like the father in Billy's dreams. His hair was a dirty blonde, much like his son's, and hung to his shoulders in loose curls. His eyes were the color of mud, the pupils strangely dilated. A day's growth of beard covered his cheeks, and a sour smell radiated from him. Billy identified it as a mixture of axle grease, old sweat, and rock and rye. "Daddy?" Earl Cairo tossed back the covers of his son's narrow bed. "Come on, son. Time to go." "We going someplace, Daddy?" "Yeah, that's right. We're going for a ride, buddy. You're always saying you want to go for a ride in the tow truck, ain't you?" Billy nodded, his sleepiness replaced by excitement, although this was a rather strange time for his father to plan an outing. Billy didn't think anything about it. After all, his father did a lot of odd things. "You've got to hurry up if you want to go with me. Get your slippers on, come on." "What about Mommy?" "Huh? Is Mommy coming for a ride too, Daddy?" His father's face twisted into a lopsided grin. "No, your mom's not coming this time. This is just for you and me, us men." The news that this was going to be men's stuff, and that he was being included, made Billy even more excited. He slid his small feet into his cat-in-the-hat slippers and made sure to grab Squeezer, his faithful teddy bear. His father was standing in the doorway, fidgeting. "Daddy, aren't we going to tell Mommy we're going for a ride?" "No!" The anger in his father's voice made Billy flinch and tighten his grip on Squeezer. "I told you, this is men's stuff. Your mama's not ever supposed to know about this. Do you understand me?" Billy nodded solemnly. "You spend too much time with your mama anyways. You're going to grow up to be a fag, boy. You don't want to be no fag, do you?" "No, Daddy." Billy had no idea what a fag was, but from the way his father said it, it was as bad as a Negro or a kike. Whatever those meant, Billy was only 4. "Well, I'm going to make sure you don't. Ain't no son of mine going to grow up a homo." He grabbed Billy's hand and headed down the hall toward the back door. Billy was terrified that his mother would jump out of her bedroom like a jack-in-the-box, spoiling his chance to be a man like his father, but her door stayed shut. The night was cold and damp, and the dew quickly soaked Billy's bedroom slippers and the cuffs of his Mickey Mouse pajamas. He started to whimper, but bit his lip when he saw the look his father gave him. The tow truck was parked on the driveway behind Nora Cairo's beat-up Volkswagen Bug. Billy stood in awe of the huge truck with its searchlights mounted on the driver's side and emergency flashers atop the cab. Earl jerked open the passenger side door and motioned for his son to climb in. The floor of the cab was level with Billy's chest. "Get in! What you waiting on? You expecting me to pick you up? You're not a baby no more. You're a man, remember? Time to act like one, son." Biting his lower lip to keep from crying, Billy pulled himself into the cab. Earl Cairo started up the engine and backed out of the driveway. He didn't turn on the headlights until they were halfway down the street. "Where are we going, Daddy?"
"Cruising."
"What's cruising, Daddy?" Earl scowled.
"You're full of questions tonight, ain't you? You keep on pestering me with questions and I'll take you home. Is that what you want?"
"No, Daddy."
"You keep your mouth shut and your eyes open, understand?"
"Yes, Daddy." Billy drew his knees up to his chin and watched his father drive. Billy thought he looked hungry. Dry, hot air blew from the heater, gradually warming the cab. Street lights flashed by the windshield. He must have fallen asleep, because the next thing Billy knew, the tow truck was rolling to a stop. Billy sat up and rubbed his eyes, frowning in confusion at how dark it was outside the truck. He guessed they must be out in the countryside. "Daddy?" Earl Cairo slid out from behind the wheel of the tow truck. Billy saw a small car like his mom's VW pulled over on the side of the road. There were two people standing beside the disabled car, a man and a woman. They turned to face Billy's father as he made his way along the gravel shoulder. Billy could see they looked relieved. It was a cold night and a lonely road, and they were pleased to see Earl Cairo and his tow truck. Billy felt a surge of pride for his father. His daddy was a hero, saving people just like Superman. Earl Cairo lifted his right hand, and the strange man jerked violently, and something dark jumped from his skull. The woman lifted her hands to her face, but Billy could not hear her scream. She turned to run, but his father was faster, hitting her with the butt of the gun. Earl Cairo caught the woman before she could fall, carrying her back to the tow truck, where his son waited for him. Earl was breathing hard when he tossed the strange woman's unconscious body into the cab, next to Billy. Billy stared at the huge bruise on the woman's forehead, from where his daddy had hit her with the gun. Her eyelids fluttered and she moaned like she was going to be sick to her stomach. Billy wanted to ask his father why he'd hurt the woman, and why he had put her in the truck. But the way his father was shaking and sweating told him he better not ask any questions. Earl Cairo produced a pair of handcuffs and secured the strange woman's wrist behind her back. Billy's eyes widened when he saw the shiny steel. Wow, he never knew his father had those. Maybe his daddy was a secret policeman, like the ones he saw on television. That would explain why he'd hurt the people with the broken car. Maybe they were really bad guys, and he was arresting them. Billy saw people get arrested and shot on television all the time, but he never dreamed his father might be a policeman. They drove for a long time, the only sounds breaking the silence being Earl Cairo's breathing, the moaning of the strange lady, and the steady drone of the heater. When his father stopped the truck, Billy looked out the window and recognized the ramshackle old barn. He'd been out here once before. It was where his father worked on cars in his spare time. Earl Cairo hopped out of the idling tow truck long enough to push open the barn doors, then drove inside. Billy craned his neck to get a better view of the interior of the shop, as his father called it. Broken down carburetors and dismantled engine blocks were scattered about the hard dirt floor. Earl left the truck again, this time to light a Coleman-filled lantern on a workbench made of 2x4s and sawhorses. He pulled the semi-conscious woman out of the cab and slung her over his shoulder, like a sack of potatoes. He glowered at Billy. "You getting out or what, boy?" This was the first time he'd acknowledged his son's presence since leaving home. Billy watched his father carry the woman over to a mound of oily cloths and burlap bags. He dumped her onto the rough bed like she was a doll. "You watch her, boy. Make sure she don't try and get away." "Yes, Daddy." Billy tightened his hold on Squeezer and walked over to where the lady lay, dazed and bleeding atop the old sacks. He knelt beside the woman and brushed her hair out of her face. He jerked his hand back when her eyes opened. Where am I?" "You're at the shop." What? Where's Tim? There was this man." Her face suddenly wrinkled and tears filled her eyes as she remembered what happened. "Oh my God, Tim! He shot my Tim!" "Are you a bad lady?" "What? You don't look like a bad lady. You're pretty. Little boy, please. You've got to help me. That other guy, he was a bad guy. The hurt lady was crying harder now. She looked scared and upset, and Billy thought it made her look ugly. I don't understand. Please go get help, little boy. Please go. He must have been very, very bad if Daddy shot him. Daddy wouldn't shoot a good person, so he must have been bad. Your daddy? Oh, dear God, no.
Get away from her, Billy.
Earl Cairo returned, holding a length of clothesline and a hammer in his big hands. He kicked the crying woman in the ribs.
What you been telling my boy, bitch? He said. You telling him lies?
The woman struggled to sit up, but it was impossible to do so with her hands cuffed behind her back. Please let me go, please. I won't tell anyone, I promise, if you'll just let me go.
Shut up!
Earl kicked her again, this time in the head. He turned to face his son.
They'll always be telling you lies, boy. That's one of the first things I learned about women. Tell you one thing, then do another.
Earl's eyes were unfocused, as if he was looking into himself and seeing another time, another place.
They'll tell you they'll come and get you, that it's for a little while. Then that little while turns into forever. They'll lie like dogs if you don't keep after 'em. Sluts and whores, that's all they are anyway. Your mama's no different, and there's only one way that'll keep 'em from lying.
Earl dropped to his knees beside the dazed young woman. He looped the length of clothesline around the girl's neck and fastened it on the side, just above the shoulder, in a simple tourniquet knot. He then bound the hammer handle up against the first twist of rope and secured it with the second crossover knot. Earl twisted the hammer handle once, twice, 3 times. The girl opened her eyes again, and Billy could see the fear in those eyes. It made her eyes shimmer in the dim light. Fascinated, he stepped closer for a better look.
See, Billy, isn't this funny? Look at her eyes bug out just like a frog's.
Earl motioned for his son to grip the hammer handle.
Come on, it's your turn to try it.
That's it. Just turn it like you would the taps on the bathroom faucet. That's my boy. Billy turned the handle, as his father had instructed. The woman's eyes started from their sockets, and her tongue protruded from her mouth. Billy giggled. She did look silly. Earl Cairo's breathing was getting louder and hoarser as he watched the girl strangle. Suddenly he pushed Billy aside and began clawing at both his clothes and those of the dying girl. Billy watched, thumb in mouth, as his father rubbed himself against her. After a couple of minutes, his father made a pained, whining noise, then lifted his head and stared directly into Billy's eyes. There was something wild and mad and angry in the way his father looked at him. Billy took a step back, suddenly afraid of the man who'd given him life. Earl Cairo grinned drunkenly at his son and said, "You never saw this. Forget this ever happened." Billy Hepler sat up in his bed, choking on a scream. The headphones over his ears were silent. His heart slammed against his ribs, sweat trickled down his back, and his penis was harder than pig steel. The image of his father strangling the nameless woman was still crisp and clear in his mind. Billy needed to puke. He pulled off the headphones and staggered to the bathroom down the hall. He was shaking so bad he wondered if he might have a fever. He gripped the sink basin and splashed cold water on his face. After a few moments, the nausea relented. Billy sighed his relief and turned to leave the bathroom. Freddy Krueger was standing in the door.
"What's the matter, Billy? Family reunion didn't go as you thought it would?"
Billy shook his head, trying to make the scarred man in the dirty sweater and razored glove disappear. None of this is happening.
"Just like what your old man did. Never happened, right?"
That was just a dream. Krueger shrugged.
"So is this."
Billy was relieved to hear he was still dreaming. He'd have a hard time explaining to his mother what this horribly burned man in his battered slouch hat and strange glove was doing in their house. Freddy leaned closer until his melted face was inches from Billy's own. The smell of open wounds and scorched meat clung to him.
"How did your father die, Billy?"
He was out in the tow truck answering a call. There was ice on the bridge, and the truck went out of control and plunged over the side and into the river. Billy spoke the words as if he was trying to convince himself.
"Are you sure?"
That's what my mother told me. Krueger's warped lips twisted into a wretched grin, revealing brownish, jagged teeth. It was a predator's smile. From his mouth came Earl Cairo's voice, the words distorted as if coming from a great distance. "They'll always be telling you lies, boy. Sluts and whores. That's all they are anyway. Your mama's no different." Billy swung at the leering, ruined face, and suddenly he wasn't in the Hepler household anymore. He blinked in confusion at the shredded wallpaper and moldy carpeting. He didn't know whose house he was in, but it definitely was not his. The smell of decay and corruption was strong, and his ears were filled with the buzzing of flies. What the fuck?
You shouldn't use such bad words.
A little girl no more than 6 stood in the doorway that led to the front parlor. She was dressed in white from her Mary Janes to the satin ribbon fixed in her hair. She looked extremely out of place amongst the rotting floorboards and crumbling plaster. Where am I? What is this place?
This is Freddy's house.
Why am I here? The little girl giggled and fled into the darkness. There was a loud booming sound as if someone was repeatedly striking a metal drum. The noise seemed to be coming from behind a door set under the stairwell. The basement door yawned open, and a reddish light seeped out. The sound of boilers hissing and thundering to themselves grew more intense. Beyond the sound of live steam and heavy machinery, Billy heard the wailing of children. A rickety metal staircase spiraled downward into the scarlet-lit gloom. Krueger's laughter echoed in his ears.
"Billy Cairo, come on down!"
Billy shook his head. "I don't want to go down there, man."
"Life is much safer underground, Billy. No one can see you hide a multitude of sins."
"No, you can't make me go down there." The cellar door slammed shut. The blood-tinged light and the screams were gone. Billy shuddered and turned toward the front door. It was time to get the fuck out of this nightmare house. As he moved to open the door, its mail slot opened inward, and a hard-bound book fell into the mildewed carpet. Billy scooped it up and studied the spine and dust jacket. The title was Beasts Who Walk as Men, the lettering designed to resemble the scrawl of a disturbed child. Billy turned it over in his hands, but it seemed to be no more than what it was, a cloth-bound book like those found in bookstores and libraries. It seemed perfectly harmless, so he opened the book. A torrent of gore erupted from its pages, striking Billy full in the face. Blood and viscera geysered forth as if propelled by a fire hose, knocking Billy to the ground. He gagged and struggled in the Icarus cascade as it swirled him down the hall toward the cellar door, now yawning wide open. Billy grabbed the door jamb, desperate to keep from being sluiced down the stairs into the boiler room below. Krueger's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
"You can fight it all you like, Billy, but it won't do any good. When the time comes, you'll be happy to go in the cellar." "No!"
Billy sat straight up in bed, shaking and sweating like a malaria victim. He tore off the headphones and threw them across the room. He was gasping as if he'd just finished a 100-yard dash. He pressed the hills of his palms into his eyes, trying to shake the images from his sleep. Was he going crazy? How could he find out if the things he'd learned in his dreams were the truth or not? He sure as hell wasn't and couldn't ask his mother. Then he remembered the book, the one that had appeared in the dream. It had seemed so real. Maybe there was a way of discovering the truth after all. He glanced at the digital clock beside his bed. It was just after 7 o'clock. The library stayed open until 10. Marcy Sims looked up from her desk, obviously surprised and pleased by Billy's unexpected appearance.
Billy, have you come to see about a job?
Actually, no, I'm looking for a book.
Oh, I see. Maybe I can help you find it. What's its title?
Billy closed his eyes for a second, summoning a mental picture of the dust jacket. I think it was called Beasts Who Walk as Men, or something like that.
Do you know who wrote it?
No. Marcy sighed as she studied the desktop terminal.
Sounds like a horror novel. You know, like the kind Stephen King writes.
She tapped the information into the keyboard. A few moments later, she smiled and looked up from the monitor.
Bingo! I found it. It's nonfiction, and it's by C.C. Simpson.
Billy wasn't sure if he should be pleased or not to find that a book he'd seen in a nightmare actually existed. Following Marcy's instructions, he managed to find it within 2 minutes. He took the book to one of the reading tables provided by the library and sat down. It looked just like the book in his dream, except that the Waking World copy had a protective jacket and property of the Springwood Municipal Library stamped on the flyleaf. He also saw, for the first time, the book's subtitle, Case Histories of America's Vilest Serial Killers. Billy scanned the table of contents. The author featured some of the more renowned killers, such as the infamous John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, and Henry Lee Lucas, as well as such less well-known deviants as Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, the Sawyer family of Texas, and others. Each murderer was profiled in his or own chapter. He read Krueger's entry first. Frederick Krueger was Springwood's own personal Jack the Ripper. And judging from the account of his life, Billy wasn't surprised that the town's Chamber of Commerce made a point of not mentioning him in their brochures. Billy scanned the pages, reading the sentences hungrily. Billy exhaled a deep breath and put the book down for a moment. It had to be the same guy. There was no way he could have known any of this beforehand, especially the stuff about the razored glove. His parents had moved to Springwood 2 years ago, and he wouldn't have been here at all if he hadn't flunked out at State and been forced to attend Springwood's rinky-dink community college. Krueger had died, and for some reason Billy was certain that the missing child killer was indeed very dead, the year after Billy was born. He flipped to the middle of the book where photographs of the assembled maniacs were reproduced on slick paper. Freddy Krueger glowered at Billy from an old AP file photo. Flanked by stern-faced state troopers, his hands bound by handcuffs. The killer's face was smooth and deceptively boyish, with curly hair spilling out from under his battered slouch-brim hat. Krueger's features had yet to blister and melt, but there was no mistaking the sharp, beak-like nose and jutting chin. This was the same man who had appeared in his dreams. Directly below Krueger's picture was another photograph, this one enlarged from an already blurry snapshot. But there was no mistaking either. The man staring out at the readers. Billy stared at his father's face for a long time. His hands trembled as he turned to the chapter detailing his father's crimes. The first thing he learned was that Earl Henry Cairo was better known, at least by criminologists, as the roadside strangler. The second thing he learned was that from early 1970 until his death in 1975, his father was responsible for the rape murders of 15 women and the shooting deaths of at least 6 men. The third thing he learned was that his father had met his death not on an ice-covered bridge, but at the hands of his wife, Billy's mother. His ears began to ring. His lungs felt as if they were filled with cotton wool, while sweat trickled down his brow and between his shoulder blades. So he read. If Earl Cairo had not died at his wife's hands, chances are he would have continued his murder spree, undetected for years to come. The only reason he was identified as the roadside strangler was his father-in-law's chance discovery of the body of Cairo's last victim in the ramshackle barn he used as a workshop. Shortly after the charges of manslaughter against her were dropped, Nora Cairo disappeared from public scrutiny, along with their young son, William. It is believed they changed their names and are attempting to forget the nightmare years that are now behind them.
Billy?
Billy jumped at the sound of his name, slamming the book shut. Marcy was standing next to him, staring at him like he'd just grown another head.
Are you all right?
I'm okay.
Are you sure?
I said I was okay, didn't I? What is it?
Oh, I'm sorry. The library's closing in a couple of minutes. Just thought I'd tell you, that's all. Are you still interested in getting a job? I can talk to my superior.
I gotta leave. Sorry about yelling.
Billy,
Billy shoved past her and trotted for the entrance. He did not want anyone, especially Marcy, to see the tears that were burning in his eyes. He meant to confront her with it right away, but somehow it didn't end up working out like that. He found himself walking along the park fronting the river, staring out at the dark water and trying to find a way to accuse his mother of lying to him. By the time he got back to the house, everything was dark, and his mother and her husband had gone to bed. Billy helped himself to his mother's bourbon. At least her alcoholism finally began to make sense. By his fourth shot, Billy began to see the allure the stuff had for her. After a few stiff ones, the dull pain associated with being alive became more bearable. He staggered upstairs and collapsed across his bed.
Hello, Billy. Ready to start your on-the-job training?
Freddy Krueger was seated on the end of Billy's bed.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Billy slurred. He was too drunk to be worried about finding the disfigured child killer in his bedroom.
For that matter, why am I even bothering to talk to you? I know who you are. Kruegers. I know that you killed a bunch of little kids back before I was born. So what the fuck do you want from me?
He slurred, asking Krueger.
I'm just doing an old friend's son a favor. That's all. I'd hate to see a family business die out. It'd be a pity to let your talent go to waste, Billy. You've got it in you to be even greater than your dad. You could write your own ticket, kid. What? I'm talking dividends and retirement plans, bonuses and profit sharing. Don't you want to be in on that? Do you want to be a nameless, faceless schmuck for the rest of your life, Billy?
Who you calling a schmuck?
I call him as I see him, Billy boy. And right now, I'm looking at a grade A loser.
Leave me alone. I don't want your lousy job, whatever it is. Krueger shook his head.
Billy, Billy, Billy. I'm not offering you a job. I'm offering you a career. A chance to never be a loser again. To carve your name in letters 10 feet high. Any asshole can get a job. Something you resent every minute you're working. In fact, most of the cattle do just that. Working jobs they hate. Your stepfather hates his job. His boss hates his job. They're all stupid, soulless food tubes tied to jobs they hate in order to provide money for families they hate, living lifestyles they fucking hate. After 30, 40 years, they're so full of cancers and tumors from swallowing their rage and frustration, they die. Just like hamsters running in a squirrel cage until they die of exhaustion. They don't have the vision or the courage to live their dreams or their nightmares. So when they die, they're forgotten, just like yesterday's news. Is that what you want? Billy boy.
I still don't understand what this has to do with me and my father and my having a career, Billy said, starting to sober up.
I'm talking about recognizing your calling, Billy. It's in your blood. I told your father about this years ago, before he ran away from the orphanage, but he didn't really believe me. Not until I crossed over. And then I came to him and made him understand. And he understood. Earl could have been a real champ, but his timing was off. That's what screwed it up, you see. Now you've come along, so I can make up for not being there to show Earl the ropes. I want to show you the ropes. And the hammers!
You keep going on about retirement programs and shit.
Don't you see, Billy boy? I'm offering you immortality. Love and pity and happiness are fleeting things. They go like puff of smoke.
Inexplicably, just such a puff appeared from his hands, and in an instant it was gone.
It's hate, Billy. Hate and fear. Pain and suffering. They're constant. As long as they're around, we're in business.
If this plan of yours was such hot shit, how come you look like a pepperoni pizza left out in the rain? Krueger moved faster than Billy imagined he could. The killer knelt on the youth's chest, his razored hand raised in preparation of a swift, slicing slap.
You're pissing me off, boy. I don't think you appreciate what I can do for or to you.
Billy swallowed and tried to smile. You're right, Freddy. I'm being ungrateful. I really appreciate what you're trying to do for me. Honest.
That's better.
Freddy stepped aside, tugging on the hem of his bedraggled sweater.
Now come with me.
Where are we going?
We're gonna have a little chat with Mommy.
Billy followed Krueger down the hall, stopping outside the door to Ray and Nora Hepper's bedroom. Krueger lifted a razor to his lips, miming silence, as he turned the doorknob. The Hepler's master bedroom was no longer there. In its place was a vast empty space lit by unseen fixtures. In the middle distance, Billy saw what looked like a large, ultra-modern desk. He could hear a faint murmuring as if someone was speaking aloud, but he could not make out the voice. Krueger walked in the direction of the desk, and Billy hurried after him. As they drew closer, he recognized the voice as female, giving dictation. The black, highly polished desk was easily 3 times the size of a pool table, and the huge wing-back chair that went with it was turned so that its back was toward them. Suddenly, the feminine voice cut itself short, and the chair pivoted so that its occupant faced them. "What do you want? Mom?" Nora Hepler frowned at her son. She wore a dove-gray business dress suit with wide shoulders and knife-edge creases. Billy was surprised at how young she looked. His mother was still in her late 30s, but the tough-as-nails executive seated in front of him was closer to his own age. "Billy?" There was a trace of uncertainty and resentment in her voice. "What are you doing here?"
"He's with me."
Nora's frown deepened as she turned her gaze to Krueger. "And who the hell are you?" Krueger doffed his battered hat and bowed.
"An old friend of your husband's."
"You're a friend of Carrie's?" She seemed perplexed and touched a framed photograph on her desk. Billy stared at the signed picture of Cary Grant, then looked back at his mother. "This is your dream, isn't it?" "Of course it's my dream, son. What I want to know is, what are you doing in here with that horrible man?" She motioned to Krueger, who was seated on the edge of the desk, tracing obscene designs in the lacquered finish. "Mom, I need to ask you something." Nora looked from Krueger to her son. "Ask me what?" "About my father." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, that? Did you really kill him?" "I hated that son of a bitch. I would never have married him in the first place. If only my parents had agreed to pay for an abortion. It would have saved me 7 years of grief. I would have gone to college, made something of myself. But instead I got stuck with you. This is what I've always wanted, to be powerful, rich, glamorous, married to a man I truly love. But now you're ruining it. Go away, Billy. I don't want you here. Isn't it enough that you ruined my real life? Billy felt her words like a barbed whip. She thought he was a part of her dream, so she'd spoken her heart's truth. Billy had wanted the truth from her, but not these bitter, stinging words. Why did you lie? Why? Nora turned her back on her son. I told you to go away, Billy. Answer me, bitch! Billy grabbed the chair and spun it around. Billy, stop that! Liar! Lying bitch! Daddy was right! You're just like the rest! Nothing but a lying bitch! Nora looked genuinely surprised when her son's hands clamped on her neck. Even more so when he began to squeeze. Billy, stop! I'm your mother! Don't lie to me! You don't care about me! You never cared about my father! It's all lies! Nothing but lies! By this time, Nora's eyes were starting from their sockets, and for a minute Billy was reminded of the girl he'd helped strangle years ago. Or had there been more than one? Mom? Mom, are you all right? Krueger placed his hand on Billy's shoulder. They say killing your parents is the worst thing you could do. That's the biggest crock there is, isn't it? Believe me, I would know. The first time's the best, Billy. Let me tell you about my first one. The doctors claim that what killed Nora Hepler while she slept that night was an embolism, lodged deep within her brain that picked that moment to explode. But none of the scientific hocus-pocus fooled Billy. His mother died in her sleep because he'd killed her in her dreams. Billy was not pleased to see his aunts at the funeral. Nora and Lucille had broken off communication with one another over 10 years ago. Billy could not recall the exact nature of their disagreement, but he knew Aunt Lucille had not approved of the way his mother raised him. After the funeral, just before the guests were due to arrive for the wake, Lucille buttonholed her nephew in the parlor. She was a bosomy woman, fond of makeup and perfume. Being around her was like being overwhelmed by a 5-and-dime cosmetic counter. Billy, honey, I know you're going through hard times right now. You and your mother, God rest her soul, were very close. But there were some things your mother saw fit not to tell you about your father. Are you trying to tell me about my dad being the roadside strangler? Is that what you're trying to get at, Aunt Lucille? Lucille sighed. So you know. Did she tell you? No, she never did. I had to find out from someone else. I'm sorry you had to find out about your own father that way, Billy. I really am. Your mother and I didn't exactly see eye to eye about a lot of things. We had a falling out about whether or not she should tell you about your father. I thought she should, but she refused. I guess she wanted you to remember your father as normal. I guess she wanted you to have something you could be proud of, even if it was a lie. Cut the shit, Lucille. You know she didn't care about me. She didn't want me. She didn't want my father either. She was stuck with me because she didn't have a choice. She killed my father just like she would have aborted me given the chance. Lucille's painted lips formed into a tight line. Of all the ungrateful little... Do you realize what she did for you? What she went through? That woman faced going to prison for you, just to protect you. What do you mean? I always thought she coddled you too much. I told her so to her face. Let him deal with the truth, I told her. He's old enough now to know what really happened. But she wouldn't hear of it. She was afraid of scarring you even more than you were already. Well, she's dead now, and you're well past being old enough to know the truth when you hear it. I'm here to tell you, William Henry Hepler, your mother wasn't the one who killed your father. You were. Billy tried to shake the offending words out of his ears, but Lucille was right. He knew the truth when he heard it. No, you're lying. Earl came home drunk that night, and he started beating on Nora with you in the room. He must have been so crazy by then. He couldn't tell the difference between his own wife and one of them poor girls. He started strangling Nora right there on the divan. Lies! They're nothing but lies! Nora was screaming for someone to help her. That's when you ran into the kitchen and got the knife out of the drain rack and you... Billy wanted to keep shouting that his aunt was a liar, just like her dead sister had lied. But a red fog claimed him, And the next thing he knew, the family doctor was sticking a needle in his arm, and Ray was helping Aunt Lucille up off the floor. There were bruises on her mouth and throat, and blood trickled from one of her nostrils, mixing with the powder trapped in the wrinkles creasing her face. There was someone at the door. Billy got to his feet, dusting off his knees. He leaned his shovel against the cool brick wall and climbed the cellar stairs. He made a mental note to himself that he ought to replace a few of the more rotten wooden steps in the near future. He opened the front door and stared at the girl standing on the doorstep. It took him a full minute to remember her name. Marcy? Hi, I'm sorry I dropped by without calling. I was curious to see how you were doing in your new home. Okay, I guess. Well, aren't you going to invite me in? Billy grudgingly stood aside and allowed her to cross the threshold. She stared at the faded wallpaper and cracked plaster for a moment. Billy realized she was waiting for him to invite her to sit down. But since the only furniture he owned was in his bedroom upstairs, he remained silent. So, I hear you got a job. Yeah, I'm working as a janitor at the hospital. How do you like living in your own house? Billy shrugged. It's okay, I guess. I used pretty much all the money I got from my mom's estate buying it, but I don't have a mortgage to worry about. It's a fixer-upper, but I kind of like that. It gives me something to do, you know? Billy, I'm really sorry about your mother. Yeah, well, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call. Yeah, well, thanks, Marcy. Look, I've got to get ready for work. I was doing some work on the house when you rang the bell. I understand. As she turned to leave, Marcy gave Billy a searching look. Billy, I hope you don't mind me asking this, but didn't the real estate agent tell you about the place, about what happened here? Billy shrugged. Some people died? Big deal. People die all the time, Marcy. It's not just that. You didn't grow up in Springwood, Billy. You don't know the stories about Elm Street. They're just stories, Marcy. I know the house has been left empty for a long time. That's how I got it so cheap. I like it here. But Billy... Goodbye, Marcy. He doubted if Marcy would return. Billy didn't care if he never saw her again. She was part of his past. Billy Hepler's past. She had no place in Billy Cairo's present. He checked his wristwatch. He hadn't been lying when he told Marcy he had to get ready for work. He hated his job as janitor. The doctors and nurses and administrators at the hospital treated him like shit. They thought they were better than him because they were professionals. But the joke was on them. He and his Uncle Freddy laughed about that a lot. Krueger was waiting for him in the cellar.
You're coming along really well, Billy boy. I'm proud of the progress you've made in such a short time.
He stooped to pick up a discarded baby doll that lay alongside the edge of the narrow trench. He studied the doll's miniature features, then with the flick of his razored hand decapitated it.
Too cute to live,
he chuckled, tossing the mutilated toy into the grave with its former owner. How many more do I need, Uncle Freddy?
Taking inflation into account, I'd say you need at least another 30 kills before you'll have enough of the necessary souls stored up.
30. That was a lot. For a moment, Billy doubted his ability to pull it off. There was always the danger of his being caught or killed before reaching his quota. But with his Uncle Freddy there to help him and guide him along, he knew he would succeed. Billy hurled a shovelful of dirt into the grave. Uncle Freddy had also been right about how nice cellars were. You could hide all kinds of secrets down here. Maybe 30 or 40 of them. Oh, how he loved his work. Okay, this has been the short story, Not Just a Job, one of the 7 short stories from the book Freddy's Back, The Nightmares on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger 7 Sweetest Dreams. I thought this was a pretty good take on the Freddy Krueger lore. I thought this was a very interesting take on the character of Freddy Krueger, to kind of, have a fully living protege that was almost like his nephew. And it went back to the lore from Freddy's Dead about Freddy being raised in the orphanage and everything. I thought that was interesting and neat. But yeah, that's my opinion on it. I want to hear what you guys think, so let me know in the comment section below what you thought of this short story.
And like I said, I'll be doing these short stories from this book every now and then, just as a random upload. There are 5 more left in this book, so at any time I could be dropping another one. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening and
Pleasant dreams!